Hello and welcome once again to the Raging Introvert. Today we're going to look at an article by Fareed Zakaria on CNN called "The Trouble with Trump's North Korea Gambit." Now, there's nothing necessarily wrong with an opinion piece like about the trouble with a particular policy. That's fine. Um, Originally, I thought the word gambit was kind of loaded. It meant maybe a gamble or risky, something risky. However, quick check on dictionary.com, just a maneuver by which one seeks to gain advantage or a remark made to open or redirect the conversation. Maybe I was thinking the chess term here about sacrificing a pawn or a piece to obtain some advantage. Regardless, that was my internal either bias or misconception, but apparently this headline is fairly neutral, so that's good. Let's come down here and take a look. The news on the Korean peninsula is being described as a diplomatic breakthrough, and it is for North Korea. Now, those are two remarkable sentences been taken together because they're in one way 100% true and 100% neutral. It doesn't seem to have any bias in it. It is a diplomatic breakthrough, and it is on the North Korean side because North Koreans have wanted negotiations with the U.S. president for a long time, and finally the U.S. has agreed. So it seems to be a breakthrough for the North Koreans. On the other hand, when you look at them, even though the words are 100% neutral and accurate, overall it gives the impression that this is a point for North Korea at the expense of the U.S., which is not necessarily true because there's a reason, or you would assume that there is a reason that the United States has agreed to these negotiations. It has been the goal of North Korea for decades to have high-profile one-on-one summit meeting with the President of the United States. Yep. The Clinton administration agreed to send Madeleine Albright to North Korea to begin talks and see if enough progress was made to warrant a presidential summit. It concluded that there wasn't. Well, okay, that's true. How did since they didn't have those negotiations, how did the Clinton administration do in regards to its overall U.S. policy towards North Korea of trying to make sure they don't progress towards having a nuclear weapon? I'll give you the Cliff's Notes version here. Basically, the North Koreans dicked around with international inspectors, including everyone's favorite Hans Brix, and culminated in 1998 with a space launch vehicle, which was widely suspected to be a ruse for the testing of an ICBM. So the Clinton administration decided that it was not worth their time to negotiate and did what all most of the future presidents did and kicked the can down the road. It had economic sanctions but accomplished nothing while the North Koreans progressed towards their goal of nuclear weapons and ICBMs. The Bush administration, which labeled North Korea part of the axis of evil, which is probably a pretty accurate label to stick on them, was much cooler on high level talks. The Obama administration achieved. Wait, so that's all I'm going to say about the Bush administration. Well, let's go back and take a look at what they accomplished. Very similar to the Clinton administration, there was a lot of dicking around about inspections, will there be inspections, exchange for international aid, fuel, and food. And ultimately, the Bush administration also decided not to have presidential level talks, and the Koreans proceeded with their nuclear testing and advancements in ICBMs. So, not very successful. The Obama administration achieved breakthroughs with the Cuban and Iranian regimes through high level contacts. Yeah, they sold out. I mean, what did we get from the Cubans? We said we're going to normalize relations in exchange for promises that they would maybe consider being more democratic and less authoritarian. And the Iranians, we gave money and promises of more friendly terms, less hostile actions towards them in exchange for, again, getting dicked around on inspections. So, yeah, they achieved a lot by surrendering to our enemies. That's good. But gave up on diplomacy with the North Korean regime because of its unwillingness to denuclearize. It adopted a policy of pressure instead of engagement, which is pretty much what the previous administrations did. And until now, the Trump administration has stuck to that policy and escalated it. And how did that work out for the Obama administration? As we go through here, 2003, boy, there's a lot of stuff that happened in the Bush administration, which I already gave you the cliff notes for. And yeah, basically the exact same thing. North Koreans are launching satellites, testing nuclear devices. Oh, let's take a look. 2015, North Korea claims to have nuclear weapons capable of hitting the United States. 2016, last year of the Obama presidency, conducts its fourth nuclear test, conducts its fifth nuclear test. So, yeah, how did that program work? It increased economic pressure, and the North Koreans continued their nuclear development program. So basically, it adopted a policy of pressure instead of engagement, which failed. So why would the Trump administration continue to stick with a policy that for decades has failed? Anyway, we'll move on. Earlier this week, Vice President Mike Pence said, quote, "Our posture toward the regime will not change until we see credible, verifiable, and concrete steps toward denuclearization," end quote. And then they move on to a Trump quote. So this quote is meant to make it look like the Trump administration is going back on this policy of saying that they're not going to change their posture until there's change in the North Korean government in their relationship with nuclear development. It's not exactly correct. The U.S. posture towards North Korea hasn't changed in the sense that they still don't want to have a nuclear-armed North Korea. And we're not normalizing relations in the sense that we're easing sanctions, allowing trade. So I don't think it's as big a deal as it's being implied here. Trump himself previously ridiculed the idea of talks, tweeting, "The U.S. has been talking to North Korea. For 25 years, talking is not the answer." He humiliated Secretary of State Rex Tillerson for his diplomatic efforts, tweeting that he was, quote, "wasting his time." Now, it's interesting. They put what looks like a full quote for the first one, but only a chunk of a quote on the second one. That should raise your spidey senses that maybe there's a selective edit going on. So let's take a look and see what the full tweet was. Trump, Tillerson wasting his time negotiating with North Korea. Oh, okay. President Donald Trump on Sunday mocked North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and said Secretary of State Tillerson should not bother trying to negotiate with him in an effort to stop the country's development of nuclear weapons. Quote, "I told Rex Tillerson, our wonderful Secretary of State, that he is wasting his time trying to negotiate with Little Rocket Man." He continued, "Save your energy, Rex. We'll do what has to be done." So it doesn't sound like he's humiliating Rex Tillerson. In fact, this says it's Trump mocking the North Korean leader and saying that Tillerson shouldn't waste his time because Kim Jong-un is not open to negotiation. It's not mocking Tillerson and making him look stupid. It's mocking Kim Jong-un. That's from CNN, and yet this CNN opinion writer deliberately misrepresents what this quote was about, what this tweet was about. That is crappy journalism. It's biased misinformation, and that's why CNN keeps getting labeled as fake news. Continuing. So, what changed this week? It's not clear. And that, ladies and gentlemen, sums up the article for you. The news media is in the business of providing news to people. And when there are events in the world and they don't know what's going on, or maybe when there's not much going on, you still have to make money. You still have to sell a product. So if you don't know what the hell's going on, well, what are you going to do? You're going to just sit and wait? No, you're going to make some crap up. You're going to speculate without any information. And that's what's happening here. The charitable interpretation would be that the South Korean government received assurances that the North was serious about talks to eliminate its arsenal. Let's be clear that North Korea has announced no concessions, no reversal of its arsenal, no denuclearization. Now, that would be kind of strange before negotiations, just for North Korea, just one day to say, hey, you know what, everybody? We're going to give up our nuclear program. We're giving up. We're giving up. We want to turn our stuff in. We would like to meet with President Trump, but we're turning our stuff in and ending our program now. We're going to allow inspectors in. Is Mr. Zakaria that naive or that stupid to think that's the expectation? That's how it would normally work? No. There would be a negotiation, and then the result of the negotiation would be concessions, reversal of its arsenal, or denuclearization. What appears to have happened is the following. Trump was told that in the talks between North and South, Kim Jong-un expressed a wish to meet him, and Trump jumped at the opportunity. Henry Kissinger has often said that presidential summits should be the climax of a long negotiating process, not the beginning. Trump's gambit turns that dictum on its head. I think maybe a charitable interpretation would be that this is not a presidential summit before a long negotiating process. This is a presidential summit after a negotiating process of decades that has resulted in failure in the United States of achieving its goals of a denuclearized North Korea. And if that's the goal and decades have failed, why would Donald Trump continue a policy that has resulted in failure and the progress of North Korea toward a nuclear weapon? Maybe that's the more charitable interpretation, Mr. Zakaria. Victor Cha, once slated to be Trump's ambassador to South Korea, warns that a presidential summit is dangerous because if it fails, it leaves little room for further diplomacy. The outcome, he says, could actually end up being war. I would ask Mr. Cha, how much room is there now for further diplomacy? There's not much. And the outcome could actually end up being war. What if we continue with the path we're on, that previous administrations have set us on for decades, of saying a nuclear North Korea is unacceptable to the United States, and yet we're not stopping them from achieving that goal. And eventually, in 1 year, in 3 years, in 5 years, at the current pace, they suddenly have a nuclear-armed, capable ICBM, at least for reaching maybe not all the way to the U.S., but within the region, let's say. What happens at that point? Either the U.S. backs down and looks weak, or the outcome is war. So I don't think at this point there's much to lose. The current path is for war, so something has to change. But we should look on this move with hope and wish the president and the administration well. Wait, what? We should look on this move with hope and wish the president and the administration well. You know, as much crap as I give CNN and most of its incredibly liberal writers, I'm sure this is actually difficult for Mrs. Zakaria to write, but I think it's genuine, and I appreciate it. I would hope that everyone, even if they think this is kind of a dangerous course of action, I would hope every American and pretty much everyone in the world should hope that the president is successful in however that is measured, whatever progress can possibly be made to averting war with North Korea and averting a nuclear-armed North Korea. Now, I think it's important to note that as a member of the far left, his side thinks that thoughts and prayers are not enough on other issues, But I still appreciate his hope and wish for the president. Yet it does feel like it is part of a pattern. Trump talks tough toward countries like China and Saudi Arabia. They then flatter him, put on parades and banquets, and he quickly reverses course. I'd be curious to see some examples of that, but let's see, we'll go on. And in his eagerness to reward flattery, he makes large concessions and gets little in return. The United States has endorsed Saudi policy in Yemen and Qatar with no noticeable reciprocal reward. Well, that's interesting. Let's see why the United States is endorsing policy in Yemen and Qatar. Here's a nice BBC article talking about the Yemen crisis. Who is fighting whom? Well, that's a good question. The bottom line is that Yemen had a rather authoritarian ruler, and the people were not happy. The Arab Spring came along. He was ousted. The vice president assumed power. And in the vacuum, when that transition happened, rebel groups stood up. Al-Qaeda infiltrated and started trying to gain power in the region. And that became an issue. Alarmed by the rise of a group they believed to be backed militarily by regional Shia power Iran, Saudi Arabia and 8 other mostly Sunni Arab states began an air campaign. So it's not just Saudi Arabia, it's an actual coalition of Middle Eastern nations aimed at restoring Mr. Hadi, the vice president who assumed power after the Arab Spring government. The coalition received logistical and intelligence support from the US, UK, and France. So it's countering, it's trying to bring stability back to a dysfunctional, broken nation in the Middle East, which has Al-Qaeda and Iranian influences right now. I didn't know we needed Saudi Arabia to give us money, aid, or concessions in exchange for fighting Iranian influence and terrorism. Maybe Qatar is different. Let's check that one. Saudi Arabia, Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Yemen cut ties to Qatar on Monday, claiming the energy-rich monarchy is undermining stability in the region by supporting in the Iran-aligned militant groups. Well, who would have thought the Iranians are once again supporting militant groups in a country that's been destabilized, and our traditional counter, our allies that are acting as a counter to Iranian influence, the Saudis, are someone we would support in the Middle East in these operations. I don't know why we would expect the Saudis to have to give us concessions in exchange for furthering our interests against terrorism in Iran. Let's continue. What else? What else is he expecting? Trump announced a major concession to Israel, the move to Jerusalem, without even asking for something in return. Maybe the more charitable interpretation of this decision would be the fact that the Jerusalem Embassy Act was passed in 1995. Senate voted 93-5 in favor. The House 374-37. Not exactly a narrow margin. And in this act, the Congress recognized Jerusalem as the capital of the state of Israel and called for Jerusalem to remain an undivided city. Funds were set aside for the relocation of the Embassy of the United States from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Now, all the subsequent presidents kept invoking a 6-month waiver, saying that there were national security issues. To what end? What the goal, as you look here and read other places, was that maybe Jerusalem could be used as some kind of bargaining chip in a grand peace negotiation between the Palestinians and the Israelis. And how has that worked since 1995? It hasn't worked. There have been plenty of negotiations, plenty of very generous offers to the Palestinians. The Palestinian leadership is not interested in concessions, negotiations, and a peaceful two-state solution. Trump recognized that, and Trump said, if you're not going to be good faith negotiating partners, I'll just execute the act. We'll make Jerusalem the capital, and now it's not an issue anymore. Yeah, I don't know why there needs to be concessions from the Israelis when it's already passed into law and there's really no security reason to have a waiver. The law is executed. Done. South Korean President Moon Jae-in seems to have noticed. He has sought to move events on the North Korean peninsula away from war talk and towards negotiations, essentially the opposite of Trump's declared path. Trump's declared path is not, I am going to war with North Korea. Trump's declared path has been, if North Korea continues its hostile, aggressive activities, they will be destroyed. He's not saying he wants to go. He's not declaring war. He's saying that North Korea's activities and actions will result in war, and Trump is not unwilling to do that if necessary. He didn't say he wants it, but he's willing to take that course if necessary. He took pains to always praise Trump while he charted his contrary course. Again, everyone's in favor of peace and denuclearization. He did it again this week, giving Trump ample credit for the opening. All these countries seem to understand how to play Donald Trump. What we need to watch now is whether Donald Trump knows how to play them. All these countries up here are not playing Donald Trump. Donald Trump is furthering U.S. interests and supporting U.S. allies. That's how you should work with your allies. Otherwise, why would someone bother being your ally? Why would someone bother considering themselves your ally if they have to pay for your support in joint interests? Why would you misrepresent? Well, I know why he would misrepresent Trump's policy positions and his I don't want to say intelligence, but his diplomatic acumen. What we need to watch now is whether Donald Trump knows how to play them. Well, at least, it doesn't sound incredibly charitable, but Trump throughout the election and his governance so far, people keep underestimating Donald Trump, and ultimately he wins and furthers his agenda. So, yes, Mr. Zakaria, I think we need to watch and see what happens. Realistically, in some ways, I don't think Trump can lose at all. The worst thing that happens is he walks back from the negotiation, says, "Those guys are jerks. They aren't serious. They're not gonna have any concessions," and just leave it at that. At best, maybe there will be some kind of breakthrough, and that would be historical and earth-shattering. And I hope if that does happen, Mrs. Zakaria will give him proper credit. That's it for today. So let me know what you think in the comments below.